Alara Voss had never been the kind of girl who asked for much. She lived in a small room above the old archive building at the edge of Ironvale Township, and she was perfectly fine with that. She woke up early every morning, made herself a cup of bitter tea, and walked down the narrow stairs to spend her day surrounded by old books and dusty records that nobody else cared about. It was a quiet life. It was her life, and until the night of the Mate recognition ceremony, she had almost convinced herself that quiet was enough. The ceremony was held every year in the great hall of Ironvale Keep. Every wolf in the Northern Kingdom came. They dressed in their finest clothes, stood under the stone arches, and waited for the moon goddess to reveal her pairings. It was considered the most sacred night of the year. For most people, it was also the most exciting. Families gathered. Young wolves whispered nervously to each other. The energy in the hall was warm and full of hope. Alara stood near the back. She wore a dress that a kind woman from the township had lent her, because she did not own anything formal. She held a clay cup with both hands, and tried not to take up too much space. She had no real reason to expect anything from this night. She had been born without a wolf form, something the pack physicians called a null condition. It was rare, and it was pitied, and it meant, according to everyone who had an opinion about it, that she would never truly belong in the world of wolves. She had made peace with that, or at least she had practiced making peace with it, until it felt almost the same thing. Then she felt it. A warmth, sudden and certain, moved through her chest, like sunlight coming through a window she had forgotten to close. She looked up from her cup. Across the crowded hall, King Kalen Ashvorn was walking toward her. He was everything the stories said he was, and nothing like what she had imagined. Tall, cold-looking, eyes the color of winter sky. He had fought 2 wars before the age of 25, and had never once been seen showing weakness in public. The entire hall went silent as he crossed it. Every single person understood what his movement meant. He stopped 2 feet in front of her. He looked at her for a long moment, and then, in a voice that carried clearly to every corner of the room, he said 4 words. "I reject this bond." He did not lower his voice. He did not hesitate. He turned to face his court, and explained calmly that the moon goddess had made an error, that a king at war could not be paired with a girl who had no wolf, no rank, and no family name worth speaking of. He produced a formal rejection scroll, already signed and sealed, and held it out to her. Alara put down her clay cup. She took the scroll with both hands. She looked at him once, not with tears, and not with anger, but with an expression that was steady in a way that seemed to make several people in the room slightly uncomfortable. Then she dipped her head and walked out through the side door. The court watched her go. Some of them laughed, quietly, the way people laugh when they think no one important is listening. Outside, the night air was cold and clean. Alara walked back to the archive. She climbed the narrow stairs. She sat on the edge of her bed in her borrowed dress, and did not sleep for a very long time. She did not cry either, not because she was not hurt. She was hurt more deeply than she had words for. But somewhere underneath the hurt was something else, something that did not feel like defeat. She could not explain it. She filed it away and waited to understand it later. 3 weeks passed. Alara went back to work. She cataloged old remedy records. She organized boxes of historical texts that had been piled in the lower archive for decades without anyone sorting them. She made tea every morning and went to bed every night, and did not speak to anyone about the ceremony unless someone brought it up, which most people had the decency not to do. Then one midnight she was alone in the lower archive, pulling a misfiled box from the restricted records shelf, and she found something that changed everything. The box was old, very old. The label on the front was written in a script she had never studied. She opened it anyway, and without understanding how, she found that she could read every word. She sat down on the stone floor and did not move for 4 hours. The texts inside described a bloodline older than all the alpha lineages combined, older than the pack structures, older than the territorial wars that had shaped the current kingdom. The bloodline was called the Aethon. They were not wolves in the ordinary sense. They were the first shifters, the original ones, from whom all wolfkind had descended long ago. Their power did not come from a wolf form. It came from the body itself, from accelerated healing, from a deep sensitivity to the natural world, and at its fullest expression, from the ability to sense and understand the sacred bonds between wolves in a way no one else could. The Aethon line had been declared extinct 4 centuries ago. Declared extinct, the texts were very careful to note, by the ancestors of the current Alpha King's bloodline, following a deliberate and thorough erasure of records and people. At the back of the final document, there was a genealogical record. Water had damaged parts of it, but the last legible line contained her father's family name. Elara sat with that information for a long time. Then she went upstairs, made tea, and began cross-referencing everything she had just read against every other historical document in the archive. She thought about her father, Ren Voss, who had served the kingdom's border posts for 18 years before a political lie stripped him of his rank. She thought about how he had died 2 winters after that, of a grief that wore the face of fever. She thought about how she had always healed faster than anyone around her, how warmth left infected wounds when she pressed her hands against them, how the oldest books in the archive always seemed to fall open as if they were glad she was there. She had not been born broken. She had been born into a secret that someone powerful had decided to bury. While Elara was quietly putting together the truth in the archive, King Kaelan Ashforn was having a very difficult few weeks of his own. 3 border packs had stopped sending their required payments to the crown. A mysterious poison had moved through his royal stables and killed 9 warhorses without a traceable source. His council was pushing hard for him to agree to a political marriage with the Eastern Ridge Alpha's daughter, a union that would solve certain problems and create several new ones. His royal physician had also told him something he had not shared with anyone. The rejection ceremony had not been completed properly. The scroll was a legal document. The bond between 2 fated mates was something much older than law, and severing it required the willing participation of both people involved. He had never asked Elara. She had never agreed, which meant that after all his very public certainty, the bond was still there. He felt it at night most often, a quiet warmth, low and directionless, that his body kept trying to follow toward something he refused to name. It frustrated him in a way he could not fully explain and would absolutely never admit. He was still thinking about the girl in the borrowed dress. This also frustrated him. It was his beta, Damon, who brought things to a head. Damon was not a sentimental person. He was a strategist who noticed things and took quiet notes about them. He had noticed the way the candle flames near Elara flickered sideways as she left the ceremony hall. He had pulled the archive visitor logs as a routine security matter and found that she had been accessing restricted historical records for weeks. He translated one excerpt and placed it on Kaelan's desk without comment. Kaelan read it twice. Then he sat back in his chair and said very quietly, "Find out how much she knows." He found out 3 days later, when an anonymous submission arrived at the Kingdom's Office of Historical Verification. Someone had sent the Aethon records for official authentication. A senior council member named Forsyth placed the authentication report on the table during the next council meeting, and looked at the king with the particular expression that experienced advisors use when they are about to say something the king will not enjoy hearing. "If this bloodline is real and alive," Forsyth said, "it changes what the crown is built on, and our enemies will use it before we do, if we wait any longer." Kaelan went to the archive that evening. He went alone, without guards, which was not something he did. Elara was at her desk when he arrived. She looked up, registered him, and went back to her page. He told her she had submitted the records. She corrected him. She had authenticated them and submitted them so they could never be buried again. She said it the way someone says something that should have been obvious from the beginning. They talked for a long time that night, not warmly, not easily, but honestly, which was something neither of them had much practice doing with another person. He told her that the Free Ridge Accord, the coalition of dissenting border packs, was using the Aethon discovery to argue that his entire kingship was built on a historical injustice. She told him that it was. He told her that was not helpful. She told him she was not there to help him manage the truth. He left without resolving anything, but he walked back to the keep thinking about the way she had looked at him, not with bitterness, and not with warmth, with patience. The kind of patience that comes from a person who has already decided, a long time ago, to play a longer game than everyone around them. The situation became public faster than anyone could contain it. Within 2 weeks, the Aethon claim had moved far beyond a border dispute and into something that touched the foundations of how wolfkind understood itself. Pack law, succession rights, territorial authority, the sacred nature of the Alpha bloodline, all of it rested on a version of history that the authenticated records were now quietly contradicting. Some packs rallied behind the king, others joined the accord. But a third group, smaller and quieter, made its way to Ironvale Township without being called there by anyone. Scholars, healers, wolves who had spent their whole lives at the edges of pack power and had never quite been given a reason that explained why they felt so out of place. They came to the archive. They came because of Ilara. She had not invited them. She had not sent any messages or made any speeches. She had simply kept her door open and answered questions honestly when people asked them, and it turned out that in a kingdom full of managed information and careful silence, that was an extraordinary thing to offer. Within a month, 40 people were gathered around the archive building. Kalen stood at his window one night and looked at the lights down there for a long time. "She is not trying to take anything," he said. "No," Damon agreed. "She is just existing. And it is doing all of this." "Yes." Kalen was quiet for another moment. "That," he said slowly, "is more powerful than a campaign." He went back to the archive. He sat across from her desk. He did not talk about politics this time. He told her that he had been wrong. Not strategically, personally. He told her that what he had done in the Great Hall had been wrong, in a way that had nothing to do with bloodlines or kingdom politics, and everything to do with the fact that he had looked at her and made a decision in 3 seconds, and then dressed that decision up as wisdom for weeks afterward. She listened. She did not make it easy for him, which he was beginning to understand was simply how she was with everyone, not a punishment designed specifically for him. Then he told her the truth behind the decision. His father had died during the First War, and left him a kingdom that was bleeding, and a court that was watching him for any sign that he was too young or too uncertain to hold it together. He had walked into that ceremony hall already afraid, though he would never have used that word at the time. When the bond landed on a girl with no wolf and no rank, what he had felt in that first second was not coldness, it was terror. The terror of caring about someone he could not understand, and therefore could not protect. So he had done what frightened leaders sometimes do. He had turned the fear into a verdict and delivered it loudly before anyone could see what was underneath it. Ilara was quiet for a moment after he finished. "That is the most honest thing I think you have said to another person in a long time," she said. "Probably," he said. "It does not undo the hall," she said. "No," he agreed, "it does not. But it is a beginning," she said. "If you want a beginning." He declined the Eastern Ridge marriage. He stood before his court and then before his kingdom and acknowledged the historical record plainly, without softening it. He said that the crown had an obligation to reckon honestly with what its founding had erased. It was not a comfortable speech. 3 council members resigned. 2 previously neutral packs joined the accord in protest. But 4 packs that had been in the accord withdrew from it, because their real grievance had never been about ancient bloodlines. It had been about feeling ignored for generations. A king who could stand publicly and say the kingdom had been wrong was a different kind of king than what they had expected. Ilara's abilities continued to grow, not in dramatic bursts, steadily, carefully, the way she did everything. She discovered that she could sense the bond threads between wolves the way other people sense temperature. She could not create or destroy them, but she could read them with a clarity that turned out to be enormously valuable in a society where bonds were sometimes falsified or forced for political reasons. She became, without anyone formally appointing her, the kingdom's first bondkeeper in 400 years. She kept her room above the archive. She kept her desk. She kept making bitter tea every morning and going to work every day in the place where she had first found out who she really was. No throne room was going to replace that. She had built her entire self in that building, and she was not leaving it behind for anyone. Kalen came to her in the evenings. He sat across from her. He read, or argued with her about policy, or occasionally just sat in the particular quiet that she had always been very good at creating. It was not a simple relationship. Neither of them was a simple person, but it was honest, which turned out to be the rarest and most valuable thing either of them had ever been offered. The kingdom did not become perfect. Kingdoms never do. But for the first time in centuries, It became a place where the truth was not something that needed to be buried to keep the walls standing. And the girl who had stood at the back of a grand hall in a borrowed dress, holding a clay cup, prepared as always to be invisible, had turned out to be the person the whole kingdom had been quietly waiting for, without knowing her name.